Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, 2024. The excavation has gone smoothly these past 3 weeks, but today we've encountered something so strange that it warranted the creation of this entry you're presently reading. As of this moment, I'm not sure whether or not to officially publish these finds, as I fear for the repercussions it may produce, and I do not wish to tarnish my professional legacy. The reason I'm even writing this entry to begin with is to keep a personal record of these recent events while they're fresh in my mind, but I also intend to post it anonymously to the internet, where it will likely be swept away and disregarded as a hoax or urban legend. I'm fine with that, I just need to get it off my chest. I know it's not rational or even a good idea to share this with strangers, but I just need to tell someone. Maybe someone will know what is going on. Until I have fully decided on whether or not to publish, I will keep this as anonymous as I can. I'm a paleoanthropologist at an esteemed university in the States, and I've been leading a small excavation team here in Tanzania at one of the oldest sites of hominin occupation in the world, Olduvai Gorge. Our excavation site was located on the eastern stretches of the gorge, in a particularly hilly area, as scouted by our surveyors. They chose this spot due to the presence of a series of small and seemingly undiscovered rock shelters hidden away behind thick shrubbery and debris. It is nothing short of a miracle that they were able to be located by our team. Over these past weeks, we have found here an abundance of lithic assemblages, most of them consisting of Oldowan scrapers and cores, but we also found a pair of Aculean hand axes and a few bifacial points. Deep in one of the rock shelters, we even unearthed the partial remains of what is most likely an Australopithecine upper skull, though further osteological analysis is pending. All seemed to be going well until today, when my lunch break was interrupted by one of my students. I will refer to him as Edward. He came rushing over from the easternmost rock shelter, nearly stumbling over all the pebbles and sticks in his way as he hurried down the hill toward the tents, calling my name. I rose from my seat to greet him, fearing that some sort of accident had happened. "What is it?" I anxiously inquired. I had never seen him this upset. "You gotta come check this out, right now," he replied enigmatically and ushered me to follow him. I went with him up the hill and into the mouth of the rock shelter. Immediately I noticed what all the fuss was about. Deep in the innermost end of the rock shelter, past all the excavation tools and equipment, where there had previously been a solid rock wall, there was now a small opening. I saw the small hole next to this big rock, and I just kept digging and digging, and I moved some more rocks, and "Oh, okay, you should have notified me sooner," I said, cutting him off as I ventured deeper into the shelter toward the gaping hole. I feared that, in his eagerness, he may have disturbed an important context. But the thing is, I looked inside it, with my light and whatnot, and I saw these, things. You better take a look. I crouched down beside the hole and searched my pockets for my flashlight. The opening seemed big enough for someone to crawl into, and as I turned on the light, the shining beam illuminated a massive cavern on the other side, probably big enough to stand in. "Remarkable," I uttered. "Shine your light at the far end walls. Do you see them?" Edward probed. I did as he had asked me, and as my light moved across the dusty volcanic rock walls of the chamber, I laid my eyes on something that made my heart skip a beat. First believing it to be merely a trick of the light, I stuck my head deeper into the opening to get a better view. "You see them, don't you?" Edward's voice echoed behind me. Lost for words, I began crawling through the opening, eagerly disregarding any health and safety precautions one would be wise to employ when venturing into such undiscovered cave environments. I heard Edward calling out to me as I did so, begging me to be careful. I scraped up my arms and legs in the process, and as I emerged on the other side, I was completely covered in dust, which I promptly brushed off my rugged clothes as I stood up. On the far end wall were a series of rough carvings onto the rock. Carvings in the Latin alphabet, carvings in English. The whole wall was full of them, as if it was a page in a book. Behind me, I heard Edward grunting and shuffling as he made his way through the opening to join me in my astonishment. I scanned the rest of the cavern with my light and saw that the inscriptions continued on the other surfaces and walls of the chamber. Not only that, but I noticed a series of strange artifacts scattered about, seemingly undisturbed for millennia. Among them were several aforementioned Oldowan stone tools and a ring made of mostly pure gold, judging by its pristine condition, as well as some bones randomly strewn around. My immediate thoughts were that the cave must have been used in modern times, times, perhaps recently. I hadn't yet actually read the content of what was scribbled on the walls, but even still, something about that explanation immediately felt off. The strata next to where the opening had been was undisturbed and had naturally accumulated for millions of years. I should know because I monitored it closely yesterday when we started digging in that part of the rock shelter. I realize some of you reading this might not be familiar with stratigraphy and thus not fully understand why this would be an issue when regarding the date of the inscriptions, but those well acquainted with the law of superposition should know exactly why this shouldn't be possible. If you don't, I urge you to Google it. But to make a long story short, however, the law of superposition states that geological layers accumulate over time, and that under normal circumstances, the layers that are the oldest are those found further down. Now, assuming the entrance we came in is the only entrance into the cave, and taking into consideration the opening was buried under a dozen stratigraphical layers, it means that it was last sealed around 1 million years ago at the earliest. Everything about this was strikingly anachronistic, but I saw no other explanation. There seemed to be no other way to enter the cave, and there was no sign of a previous collapse. "What is this, Edward?" I asked him, who was now full of dirt and standing beside me. "Are you pulling my leg here? Is this some kind of elaborate joke?" "No, sir, I promise." "It shouldn't be possible then," I said, pacing back and forth. "Yet evidently it is." He somewhat snarkily replied. I ignored him. My pacing took me around a slight bend in the cave, and I noticed a heap of what looked like different chunks of various metals. Some seemed to be nearly reduced to dust as a result of deterioration over time, while others looked pretty much to be in pristine condition, although not as shiny as they once probably were. There were also snake-like lines in the sandy floor of the cave with traces of heavily oxidized copper encompassed within them. Had these once been wires? If they were ever covered in plastic, as most wires today are, it must have broken down millennia ago, leaving no trace. Quite remarkable. "Doc, you should see what's written on these walls." Edward's voice echoed around the bend. "Just a second," I replied, carefully observing the strange assemblage and analyzing it as best as I could. I had never seen anything like it in my life. Was this a machine? "Whoa, like you really need to come right now," Edward again urged me. I emerged from behind the bend to see what all the fuss was about, and when I did, I noticed the dusty visage of Edward looking pale as a ghost. "What's the matter?" I asked, looking at where the beam of his flashlight was illuminating the inscribed wall. "Read what it says," Edward urged me, and so I did. In the following section of this entry, I will recount word for word what was inscribed on those walls. Where there is significant erosion or other obstruction of the text, I have filled in the gaps. From what I interpreted to be the beginning, the upper left corner, it read as follows. "Upon arrival, the machine broke down almost instantaneously. I am the only living Homo sapiens in the world, and there won't be another like me for at least 2 million years. There is an overwhelming hopelessness to it all. There is no hope for me. I have accepted it. These things, these devils, have left me no other choice than to seal myself into this tomb. I can hear them at night digging and scratching." Thus read the first section of the text. Beneath it, the next one read, "My name is Bill Hartnell, and I was born on the 29th of September 2029 in Exeter, England, and this is my full story. I'm stuck in here for the foreseeable future, so I might as well tell my tale in as much detail as I can. I've got nothing better to do to pass my remaining time. Apologies if I don't get to finish it. Writing on this wall is somewhat tedious, however, so I will be concise. Forgive me. I studied quantum mechanics at Exxon and graduated with my PhD in 2058. The machine I built subsequently took me 10 years to complete and was operational by 2068, which is also the year I traveled here. I have now been here for a total of 2 weeks, and fear this may be my last. If you find this message, Patricia, you were both right and wrong. Right in that it would end badly, but wrong in that it wouldn't at least work." The writing ceased as this wall had met with the ground, but it continued on another, larger register to its upper right. My goal was to travel through time and witness every significant human benchmark in chronological order, starting here with the earliest use of tools and ending my tour with the 2029 Mars landing launch. But now it seems the beginning of the human story will be the end of mine. There is something else here, something that doesn't belong. One moment I was in my garage in Exeter, ready to go, and in the next a blinding white glare surrounded me, and as I opened my eyes I found myself on the prehistoric African continent. I immediately felt the scorching heat of the sun burn into my skin, and in that moment I cursed myself for not bringing sun protection. Such an obvious oversight, I thought. My pale British skin would be the death of me. The first thing that stood out to me was how humid it was compared to the present. If my calculations are correct, I should be at the site of Olduvai Gorge, but here there is neither a gorge nor the arid shrubland it is known for. This place is ripe with vegetation and fauna. As I stepped out of the machine, I noticed it had broken, and I dragged it off into a nearby cave for protection until I could get it running again. I spent my first night inside that cave, sheltered from the elements and wildlife, and trying to repair my device. It was a futile effort, as I do not possess the parts necessary for such a repair. Another fatal oversight. My first 4 nights were relatively normal, or as normal as you would expect them to be 2 million years in the past. On my second day, I cautiously ventured outside the shelter, and it didn't take long for me to make contact with the locals. Presumably they are Homo habilis, but it is hard to tell. I am a physicist, not an anthropologist. Seeing them in the flesh is a surreal experience. To think I am the first human to lay eyes on another living human species in 40,000 years is extraordinary. I guess this writing also technically makes for the earliest writing in human history, which is also neat. The other humans first greeted me with a sort of reserved curiosity. They carried in their hands various stone tools and looked bizarre, though to them I probably looked equally strange. If they had the cognitive abilities to form thoughts about religion, I must have resembled a god to them. They let me observe them from a distance and never posed any problems. If anything, they wanted nothing to do with me. I find it ironic how these people live in dwellings constructed between trees and shrubbery out in the open, while it is myself who is living in a cave like some troglodyte. On the 5th night, things got strange. Just as the sun was setting, I was heading back to my cave when I heard my name called out, almost like a faint whisper, coming from the tree line a short distance away. That voice, raspy and out of breath, I had never heard anything like it before. I am positive it was not made by any of the local hominins. I briefly decided to investigate, but when I heard rapid approaching commotion in the bush, I took off. In my terror, I heard the loud snapping of twigs behind me. I ran all the way back to the cave and sealed the medium-sized opening with a makeshift door made out of wood and some rocks. I leaned in and listened intently after any noise, and heard the rustling of some bushes not too far away, accompanied by some kind of raspy vocalization. Nothing else happened that night. The following morning, I saw outside my shelter concentric circles drawn in the sand, but no accompanying footprints. Later that day, I was led into the village of the hominins. There, I traded my phone for some stone tools. I had no use for it anymore. The humans seemed perplexed by it, but were equally enchanted by its reflective surfaces. They allowed me to take some fruits and berries, but would not let me near the game meat, shouting whenever I did so. Despite that, I still can't believe the hospitality they showed me. As the sun was setting, I left the forested shelter of my ancestors and began walking back to the cave. The volume of trees gradually subsided, and I found myself in an open and lush savanna-like environment, but with thick shrubs on either side of the path. Then suddenly, something struck the ground in front of me, nearly hitting me. It was my phone. Confused, I thought the humans had grown tired of it and followed me back in anger. But then something intriguing happened. Another phone struck the ground right next to the first one, clearly of the same make and clearly identical to the one I had traded hours earlier. But that was impossible, as I had only brought one. Then another flew out from a nearby bush, hitting me in the arm. I looked around, scanning the bushes, but I saw nothing. I slowly backed up, and when I did so, the bushes rustled for a moment and then stopped. I took another step backward, and the rustling repeated and once again stopped. It was mimicking me. When I finally made that realization, I once more ran back to the cave at full sprint, quickly sealing the entrance behind me. As I turned on my headlamp, which I still had batteries for, I noticed something drawn on the sandy floor of the cave. It was another concentric circle, identical to the one outside this morning. I was too horrified to sleep, but eventually my tiredness gave in and I drifted off. I spent the next day teaching myself how to hunt. Though I had some food rations from modern times back in the cave, eventually I would need to learn how to hunt if I were to survive out here, I figured. I had tried in the morning to hunt some lizards and birds with the stone weaponry I acquired the day prior, but with little success. I couldn't survive on berries and fruits alone, so I decided that the only way to get some protein around these parts would be to accompany a hunting party. I waited outside the village until the men left for their daily hunt, but as I approached them, they angrily detested my presence, denying my company. They waved their arms at me, ushering me to keep a distance, so for the rest of the day, I did exactly that. I lived in their shadow, observing but never interrupting their hunt. The following hours were spent watching the H. habilis hunt some local megafauna. Among them was an animal that is now extinct, therefore I do not know its name, but it resembled some kind of elephant. As I, from a distance, watched my early ancestors secure the kill and slice off chunks chunks of meat with their stone scrapers, the most eerie thing occurred. About 9 of the humans stood gathered around the elephantine creature when suddenly something pale sprinted out from the nearby tree line. It was bipedal and double the height of the other men. The thing was certainly humanoid in shape, but this was definitely no primitive hominin. Its marble white flesh glistened in the sun as it ran full force toward the dead animal. The hunters quickly noticed it and scattered, some even leaving behind their stone tools. The figure ran up to the elephant and began eating, tearing the animal's flesh off with its hands. It gorged itself on the meat and suddenly stopped. I laid low in the bush about 100 meters away, eagerly watching in terrified amazement. It was hard to make out details at such a distance, but what I saw next I am certain of. The thing slowly reared its head and looked directly at my direction. I'm not sure if it saw me or not, but I could feel its piercing gaze. The wall of text ended, and Edward and I had to round a slight corner in the room to get to the next section. It was also during this time that he spoke out for the first time. "Do you think this could be real?" he asked gently, almost concerned. "I mean, you saw the strata, there couldn't possibly have been anyone else here for millions of years." "I don't know, Eddie. Let's just keep reading and find out," I answered nonchalantly back, pretending like this didn't deeply unsettle me too. Truth is, I was beginning to get highly unnerved. My initial scientific awe had now shifted into an uncertain angst. The inscriptions continued. "I haven't seen sunlight since the 10th day. That's when I saw them clearly. I had spent that day harvesting fruits and berries alongside the local hominin population. They let me follow them back into their village where we quite literally enjoyed the fruits of our labor. Again, this level of hospitality was wholly unexpected for such a primordial species of human. All was going well, but as it was beginning to get dark, I was frantically ushered out of their encampments. I thought this weird, but decided to shrug it off as a cultural thing if they even had such a concept. Heading back to my cave, the sun was setting on the horizon, and just as I was nearing the mouth of the cave, a looming shadow stretched across the ground in front of me, blocking out the last rays of light from the evening sun. Someone or something was standing high above the rocky outcrop the cave was situated beneath, casting an oppressive shadow. I looked up and saw the dark silhouette of a person. With the bright backdrop of the sunset, it was hard to make out any features, but I could tell that whatever was standing there was not one of the local hominins. When it understood that I had seen it, it began climbing down, scurrying on all fours across the rocky surfaces. Frightened, I hurried inside the cave and quickly grabbed the makeshift door and pushed it into the opening to block it. The door was more like a plug, fashioned out of a large boulder and some wooden sticks and thatch. But before I had sealed the entrance completely, I looked out of the opening one last time, and that's when I laid my eyes clearly on them. There were 4 of them, walking slowly towards the opening from about 10 meters away, now fully upright. The sheer terror I felt at that moment is indescribable. They were all ghastly pale, their flesh smooth and spotless. They stood at probably 2 meters tall, and they had neither any body hair nor any reproductive organs or nipples. The word that comes to mind when describing them is embryonic. They were featureless. Featureless in all aspects except the most harrowing. They, all of them, had my face. They looked like me, hairless, sure, but still nearly identical. The foremost of them opened its mouth and stretched out its hand and said in perfect English, "You don't belong here." That was the last I saw of them before sealing the cave completely. I quickly reinforced the door plug with any rocks and boulders I could find in the cave, and so far it has been effective. I have now been here for God knows how long. I still have enough supplies to last me several days, and enough batteries to continually power my headlamp for at least another day or 2. But I hear them, they are outside. They haven't left me ever since that frightful evening. Sometimes they take breaks, but never long enough for me to deem it safe to leave this place. For all I know, it might be a trick to lure me out. It's only a matter of time before they break in. Their cries echo throughout the cavernous walls. This writing will be my only lasting legacy, therefore I hope I have provided sufficient detail to be of some use in some way or another. This is my punishment. These devils, I know what they are. They are my lack of hubris manifest. I foolishly thought the laws of time and space were mine to conquer. However, fate would not allow it, perhaps rightfully so. Oh, how terribly, terribly sorry I am. Patricia, I'm truly sorry. I should have listened. End of text, or well, not quite. The inscriptions continue beyond this, but they were of a different character. I won't reproduce the contents of the last wall, but I can tell you what it consisted of. The blueprints for Bill's machine and a plea to be saved. The power of time was now figuratively in the palm of my hand. I'm not saying I fully believe everything that was written, but on the off chance there may be some truth to it, I choose to keep this DIY recipe a secret. I walked over to the golden ring that adorned the cave floor and picked it up. It too was inscribed with the initials B and P. I pocketed it and asked Edward, "Where's his skeleton then?" "What do you mean?" he replied. "His bones. If he withered away in this cave, they should have been here." There are some bones here. Over there as well," he said and pointed across the cave. "I know, I saw them, but they don't make for a complete skeleton, do they?" I replied. "I suppose not." Edward acquiesced, aware of the implications. "This place is giving me the creeps." I spoke, suddenly getting an intense surge of paranoia. "What do you say we head back soon?" I whipped out my phone camera and took several pictures of the inscribed walls and artifacts within the cave. Both Eddie and I agreed it was time to head back to assess the situation and where we would go from here. We agreed also not to tell the rest of the excavation crew for the time being. I am sitting inside my tent now, an hour till midnight, and writing up this entry. In the time that passed since leaving the cave, and now I have meticulously examined the photos I took, but I dare not step inside that cave again. Something inside me desperately wants to seal it again, and I regret not doing so as I think we may have committed a grave mistake. About an hour ago, our field assistant Lila came to me in my tent, voicing her concern about something. When she described what had gotten her worried, my blood ran cold. She had asked about why there were concentric circles drawn in the sand all around our encampment. When I heard this, I rushed outside with my flashlight in hand, and I saw them with my own eyes. The whole crew was gathered outside, gawking at the strange markings. In the small crowd of anthropologists and excavators, I locked eyes with Edward, and without speaking a word, I knew what was on his mind. I fear we may have unknowingly unleashed something ancient, but how? There were no passages leading further into a deeper cave system that I could see. It was an enclosed chamber, albeit very dark and with many corners. Could it mean that whatever it is we have unleashed was inside the room with us this entire time? I shudder at the thought. I think it's best I finish up this entry now. There has been an increase in whispers and unrest in the camp this past hour, so I better tend to it and try to get this situation under control. Any tips or advice to make this make sense is appreciated. If what we discovered today really is true, which I am now more inclined to believe, then our common ancestors weren't alone all those millions of years ago, and it might possibly turn out that we aren't either. It was 10:31 when my phone buzzed. Emergency alert, do not enter underground structures such as basements. Stay above ground until the all clear. My husband looked up from his phone and stared at me. Did you just get a... "Yeah, that's creepy," I said, glancing at the stairs. "Our kid had fallen asleep for the night about an hour ago. What do you think's going on?" "I don't know," he replied. "Could it be like a gas leak, radon or something? We'd had a radon pump in our basement since we moved here. Maybe there was some weird influx of it or something." I ran up the stairs to check on our 5-year-old daughter as Luke flicked on the TV. Grace was sleeping peacefully, her blanket wrapped around her. I made sure she was breathing, comfortable, totally fine before heading back downstairs. When I did, Luke was glued to the TV, which said the same thing. Black screen, pixelated white letters, blocky colors jittering along the top and bottom of the screen. Emergency alert, do not enter underground structures. "Maybe we should get out of here," I said, "but it's late and Grace has school tomorrow." "Yeah, so we'll miss school, we can go to my mom's." Luke crossed his arms and stared at the TV. He then flicked to CNN and other news channels, but whatever was happening here must have been local, because it was just the same political drivel re-airing from earlier in the day. There was not a blip of the emergency alert anywhere except the local news channel. I pulled out my phone and did some Google searches. Nothing came up, so I shot off a text to Lacey, the mom of one of Grace's friends, who lived in the next development over. We'd only lived here since the school year started, so it's not like I had a whole network of people to ask. She didn't respond. "I think we should go," I said, grabbing a duffel bag out of the closet. "What about work? Don't you work remotely on Mondays anyway?" "Yeah, but..." I walked over to our basement door. The chain was latched. I hurried into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and pulled out some postal tape. "What are you doing?" "If it's radon or something, I don't want that stuff all in our house," I said, crouching along the bottom and taping the crack under the door. "I think they'd evacuate us if that were the case." I looked up at him as I yanked another long piece of tape off the roll. "Okay, so what do you think it is?" He shrugged. When I'd taped all the cracks, I brought the duffel bag upstairs, filled it with a few random outfits for me and Grace, along with my laptop and a few of her favorite dolls. Then I grabbed the cooler and loaded our leftover pasta and yogurts into it. Within 10 minutes, I was ready to go out the door. I'll pack up the car. Can you grab Grace? I asked. Luke went upstairs. I walked down the driveway, weighed down with bags. It was a chilly, clear night. Stars twinkled high above me. The street was exceedingly quiet, the tall, scraggly pines of the surrounding pine barren stretching up to the sky. I heard the echo of a dog barking somewhere. If everyone got the alert, wouldn't there be more people deciding to leave? I glanced at the house across the street. It was completely dark, except for the light above the garage that flicked on when I came out of the house. I opened the back hatch and threw our stuff in. Luke came out after, carrying Grace, wrapped in blankets. She blinked sleepily. I strapped her in, Luke grabbed some stuff, and then we were pulling out of the driveway on the road to my mom's house an hour away. She fell back asleep, I told Luke, watching her face flick into view with the light of the passing street lamps. Good. My phone buzzed. I reached for it. Emergency alert. Your phone's GPS indicates you are leaving city limits. We do not recommend evacuating. Please return home and stay above ground. What the? I whispered. What? Luke asked. There's another alert. It's saying it knows we're leaving. It's tracking our GPS and it's telling us to stay. Luke glanced at my phone. Seriously? Yeah. That data's supposed to be private, he said, isn't it? I would think so, unless, I don't know, maybe there are some emergency protocols that allow the FBI to access it or something. We fell into uncomfortable silence. Luke clicked on the turn signal, switched lanes. You don't want me to turn around, right? He asked quietly. I glanced down at my phone. Number I don't. The highway was empty, not a single car in sight. That made me uneasy. Surely other people would be evacuating unless they were all actually obeying the second message. But who even trusts the government these days? I did another Google search. No results popped up. I refreshed over and over again. Wouldn't something be on the internet by now? We were 5 miles out of town now. I should be relieved, but I wasn't. I leaned against the window, the cold glass pressed against my forehead. The pine trees flashed by, skinny and tilted, then gave way to a charred, barren patch of forest. Both sides of the highway were burnt to the ground. I'd read somewhere that some pine cones only opened in extreme temperatures, like from a wildfire. Fires and regrowth were part of the cycle here, part of the ecosystem, in flux between death and rebirth like a phoenix. My phone buzzed. My heart dropped, but it wasn't an alert. It was a text from Lacey. Only 2 words. What alert? My fingers raced across the screen. Didn't you get an emergency alert saying to stay above ground? Number. Lacey didn't get an alert, I said. Luke paused. What if the alerts were only sent to our phones? I asked, my voice shaking. I glanced back at Grace, still peacefully asleep, head lolling softly with each bump of the car. Luke shook his head. That's crazy. No one can send messages like that, just the government or whatever. What if it's a trap? My voice shook harder. What if the only safe place was our basement? That's just your OCD talking, he said softly, empathetically. We're doing the right thing. There's something weird in town, like a gas leak, and we got out. That's obviously the safest thing to do. I stared out at the charred pines. There were a few that hadn't burned up, standing tall and stilted in the darkness. I stared out at them, wondering why they were spared. One of them moved. What the car screeched to a stop. My body lurched forward, the seatbelt locked, keeping my head from hitting the dash. Sorry, that deer just darted. His voice died in his throat. We both stared at the lower legs of something illuminated in the headlights, thin and spindly, but definitely not a deer's. They ended in twisted toes, not hooves, and extended several feet up into the darkness. Silhouetted against the starry sky, beyond the reach of our headlights, I could see something. Something tall and spindly, skeletal, crisscrossing lines of bones or sticks or something else entirely. As I stared at it, as it stared at me, a wave of dizziness washed through me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, weight pressed down on my head, and immense pressure bearing down on me. Thwack. Something hit the side of the car with incredible force. The entire car rocked on its wheels. I screamed, thwack. A mess of lines, bones, sticks outside my window, empty air between them, the stars and the pines rippling strangely behind it. Luke stomped down on the accelerator. The car shot forward, we swerved around the thing, then past the burnt section of forest and continued down the dark, twisting highway. My phone buzzed. Emergency alert. all clear, please return home immediately. We got to my mom's house around midnight, a squat brick ranch on a residential road. I glanced warily at the pines behind her house, stretching up to the sky before picking up Grace and carrying her inside. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for us, her fingers wrapped against the mug in her hand. The entire house smelled like that familiar mix of coffee and dust. I started for the guest bedroom and then got a better idea. The ranch had a lower level that was half underground. It had been finished into an office, but there was a couch down there. I could have Grace sleep on the couch and we could sleep on the floor. Where are you going? Mom was standing behind me, eyebrow raised as I undid the chain lock to the basement floor. I think we're going to sleep down there. No, you're not. It's all dusty down there. I haven't cleaned for ages. There could even be mice and... We're sleeping down here. Those alerts were probably just a prank, she continued, or a glitch or something. Besides, you're like an hour away now. I'd only told my mom about the alerts. I didn't tell her about the thing in the woods. My mom was not a supernatural person. She'd definitely chalk it up to a trick of the light or something. Casper himself could be floating in front of her face and she'd call it a trick of the light. You're being ridiculous, she continued. You know, this reminds me of that time you taped up the door to the attic, remember? When the exterminator had found a bat up there. You were worried there were more, with rabies, and they could flatten themselves in through the cracks between the door and the ceiling and bite you while you were sleeping. You don't feel the bites when you're sleeping, I growled back. A lot of people have gotten rabies from bats in their houses, and they can squeeze through really tiny places. My point is, she interrupted, it's unsanitary down there. Grace was getting incredibly heavy in my arms. I glanced at Luke, who was just standing in the doorway wide-eyed like he'd walked in on a gunfight. Then I pulled the chain lock and yanked the door open. Kate, Mom said warningly. Halfway down the stairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I got Grace settled on the couch, then pulled it out. Emergency alert. Your phone's GPS indicates you have stopped in redacted New Jersey. Disobeying an emergency alert is a federal offense. Please return home and stay above ground. I lifted my phone to show Luke, who was coming down behind me. His face looked ghastly pale in the white light. Mom was right behind him and craned her neck to read the alert too. Oh, that's BS, she said. It's not a federal offense, it's a state offense, and that would be an evacuation order like for a hurricane or something. She shook her head. You know what this sounds like? One of those scammers. I got a call from someone claiming to be my grandson. It's not a scam, Luke interrupted without elaborating. Then he worked in silence, putting the blanket over Grace, getting her comfortable. I flicked on the light and checked for mouse droppings, but I didn't see any. I'll get the rest of our stuff, he said, leaving my mom and I alone. Her expression softened as she looked down at Grace, at her perfectly cherubic little face. Do you need anything else? No, I don't think so. She nodded and went back upstairs. I glanced around. The office stuff was in the leftmost corner, the desk covered with papers and a single photo of my dad. He'd been gone 7 years now, and it seemed like every year more and more of his stuff got tucked away, moved downstairs, shoved into storage. I swallowed down the feeling and glanced around the rest of the room. The door next to the desk led to the unfinished storage area. On the other end of the basement was a sliding glass door that led out into the backyard. I didn't like that at all. We were technically underground where we stood, but the rightmost corner with the door was above ground. Did that mean we were still vulnerable? Those things couldn't fit through a glass door, I thought, but they couldn't fit through a normal door either, and apparently we wouldn't have been safe in our own home. I stared out the glass door, afraid I might see one of them out there. Maybe this was a bad idea to stay here. We were an hour away, sure, but the pines were still right at our door. Not officially the Pine Barrens, but the surrounding Pinelands ecosystem, which was almost the same thing. If those things came from the Barrens, they were only in the burned areas, I reminded myself. I imagined a pine cone spiraling in midair, petals opening as fire raged around it, and skeletons made of sticks prying their way out of the thing, creeping along the ground, stretching and growing towards the sky. Were there any maps of the burned areas? I pulled up Google Maps, looking for the blackened areas, but the information would be out of date, wouldn't it? My phone buzzed. I expected another alert, but it was a text from Lacey instead. My friend Rochelle got the same alert you did, BTW, it read. Super weird. My heart dropped. Did Rochelle, whoever she was, listen to it? Tell her not to listen to the alert. I started typing, it's a trap. Then I realized how unhinged that sounded. I didn't even know Lacey that well. I thought for a second, then typed a new message. Can you give me her number? I want to ask her about it. Pretty weird that it targeted both of us, no one else. Sure, let me ask her, was the reply. As I waited, Luke came back down the stairs, carrying our stuff, computer cords and stuffies nearly falling out of his arms. Someone else got the alert, I whispered, one of Lacey's friends. Really? Yeah, I asked for her number. A minute later, the number came in. I dialed it immediately. On the third ring, she picked up. Hello? Hi, this is Kate Lacey's friend. I started awkwardly. We got the emergency alert too, but we think it's a trap. There's something off about it. A pause. But it came from the government, she replied. How could it be a trap? It seems like no one else is getting it. When alerts are sent out like that, they're sent to all the phones in a certain location. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, I don't know, it's weird. Another pause. Well, we were just about to go to bed here, so I'd better go. Wait, I think the basement is safe and everywhere else isn't, I said quickly. I think someone's trying to lure people into staying above ground. Okay, maybe, she said unconvincingly. Look, I gotta go, sorry. A few seconds later, the call ended. Well, crap. She didn't believe me, I said, looking up at Luke, my lip trembling. She and her kids and her family, they're all going to... You tried, he said, wrapping his arms around me. That's the best you can do. I couldn't help it. I cried as we lay a blanket on the floor, got ready to sleep next to Grace. I looked down at her perfect little face, and then Luke and I snuggled under the blankets together. Hey, kiddo. I woke up with a start. For a second, I thought I was in my own bed, but then the roughness of the carpet, the aching in my back, brought me back to reality. My father's voice, rough and warm, lingered from the dream. I could almost feel his arms around me, the summer sunlight beating down on us as we played at the creek behind the house. I rolled over to check on Grace. Her eyes were wide open. She was staring behind me at the sliding glass door. Slowly, she raised a hand and pointed over my shoulder. I turned around. There was something twisting and turning, contorting itself, trying to get in through the sliding glass door like a dog through a cat door. It did it silently, except for a low clicking sound like the popping of joints. All the blood drained from my face. Dark, sinewy legs like spider legs, twisting and turning in the moonlight, squeezing itself ever so slowly through the hole it made. I now saw the shattered glass scattering the floor. I grabbed Luke and shook him. Luke. The thing fell still. I couldn't see eyes or a face, but I felt it in my gut. It was staring at me. Dizziness swept over me. I stumbled forward, losing my balance. It was like I was standing on the deck of a boat. The ground seemed to shift and tilt underneath me. I just wanted to lie down until the world stopped turning. No, I screamed internally. You can't let that thing get Grace. I glanced around the room, looking for something that could be used as a weapon. Anything. Go in there, I said to Grace, pointing to the storage room, or at least I thought I was. Everything was tilting and moving around me. Go, hide. I stumbled forward, but all the colors were bleeding together now. Everything was hazy as a dream. My father was standing in front of me, standing there in the basement, but his face was all wrong. His eye drooped out of his socket, like something had squeezed his skull. His grin was crooked. Hey kiddo, he said in a voice that sounded off-key. Nausea filled me. I started vomiting. Warm liquid down my shirt, splashing on my feet. My dad, not dad, stood tilted, like gravity had suddenly changed. One arm was too long and hung limply from its socket. I miss you so much. Stop, I sobbed. Please stop. Come with me, we can be a family again. Stop. I never got to meet Grace. Wouldn't it be so wonderful for me to finally meet her? The world tilted and shifted. I stared at my father, his left eye drooping like jelly, his crooked smile, his gaunt face, his limp arms. I opened my mouth. Hot pain shot up my shoulder. I fell to my knees instantly. I tried to cry out to say stop again, to tell Grace to run for her life, but all that came out was a scream of pain, and another, and another. When I finally opened my eyes, the world had stopped tilting. Luke was dragging me across the floor, back from the glass door. Grace was peeking out of the storage area, terrified. I touched my shoulder, stinging with pain. My fingers came away red. It bit me. I'm dying. What? My phone began to ring. Shaking all over, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. It recognized the number. It was Rochelle. You're right, she said breathlessly. No preamble. What? I asked, my voice hoarse. About the alert, my husband, he has some friends who work with cell phones and stuff, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. They traced the signal. It's not coming from the government or the town hall or whatever. I chewed my lip, held my breath. It's coming from the middle of the woods. The hospital was mostly empty, quiet, dark. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the walls were a sickly shade of seafoam green. The doctor, a tall thin man in his 60s, didn't seem to believe my story, but he admitted me for observation anyway. My mom was staying at her friend's house with Grace, in their non-walkout basement. I didn't want to leave her. I wanted her right here with me, but the hospital was above ground, and someone needed to treat my wound before I bled to death. Luke left me for a moment to use the bathroom. I closed my eyes, not intending to sleep, but I was so tired and the bite was now only a dull, throbbing pain. I drifted in and out of consciousness until I heard two voices in the room. I snapped my eyes open for a moment to see the doctor and a nurse hovering over me. They were talking softly to each other, looking concerned. I quickly shut my eyes again, pretending to be asleep. I caught a snatch of their conversation. "It's just like that man," the nurse whispered. "The one that was admitted last night, John something." A pause. "I know. What do you think this is?" "I don't know, Rita. I really don't." "Do you think we should give her diazepam preventatively?" the nurse asked. "The other one, he screamed so much." "The family will ask questions. There's no reason for her to be on diazepam for an animal bite. They'll ask questions when she's dead too," the nurse snapped back. "The least we can do is make her comfortable." "Shh. Oh crap." I didn't open my eyes, but I jumped when the nurse said dead. I now could feel both of them looking at me, their eyes boring through my closed lids. "Let's talk somewhere else," the doctor said. Hurried footsteps on tile, and then nothing. I opened my eyes. I'm going to die. I don't know how long I lay there, wallowing in my own misery, but footsteps jolted me awake. Luke was walking back in. "How's the pain now?" "Bad." I told him what I'd overheard, my voice quavering. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, but I could hear the concern in his voice. "We're going to get out of here and everything's going to go back to normal. The mayor or whatever will release some statement about a faulty alert system and..." "Stop." He looked at me warily but shut up. The two of us sat in silence. A few times Luke opened his mouth, looking like he was going to say something, but then quickly shut it again. Footsteps pattered by outside in the hallway. The tinny sounds of the TV droned on in the corner. "I'm going to call Rochelle," I told him. The line rang 3 times before she picked up. I told her everything, about the bite, about the things I saw. I was afraid of sounding crazy, but when I'd finally finished, she sounded like she was crying on the other side. "I saw my baby," she said in a low tone, barely above a whisper. I had a miscarriage at 14 weeks, and I saw this little basket with a tiny pink thing bundled up inside. And I heard her cry. Her voice broke. I knew it wasn't real, but I still went toward it, before Ravi pulled me back. "I'm so sorry," I said, the phone trembling in my hands. "Thank you. But it didn't hurt you, right? Bite you, claw you?" "No, I don't think so." The silence stretched out between us. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Just run from it forever?" "I've been talking to someone who knows about this more than we do," she replied. "Maybe I should come see you. What hospital are you at?" She told me she'd be there in an hour. Rochelle was a short, thin woman with brown skin and thick frame glasses. She wore a t-shirt with some sort of video game reference on it and faded jeans. As she hurried in, she was wringing her hands, twisting them over and over again. Following after her was a woman in her 50s. Her salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and her skin was deathly pale, like she'd never seen the sun. "This is Jamie," Rochelle said, gesturing to the older woman. "She's a professor and specializes in this kind of stuff. I've been talking to her for the past few hours and she wanted to see you." "This kind of stuff?" The woman abruptly sat down and leaned in towards me, like I was some kind of specimen she was eager to examine. "You know what's going on here?" I asked as she stared at my shoulder in a way that made me extremely uncomfortable. "Yes, sort of. Have you ever heard of something called speculative evolution?" No, I replied. "Okay, it's reconstructing what kinds of creatures would evolve under different circumstances. Maybe an amphibian would evolve to have wings like a bat, for example, if insects didn't hover around ponds. You see what I mean?" I guess. No. "We also try to construct what animals might look like millions of years from now, or humans. What kind of things will evolve under the pressure of modern humanity, modern technology? There's already some of it happening. The bed bugs in New York City are hundreds of times more resistant to pesticides than the ones in Florida are. Deer are more skittish than they were 10 years ago because cars kept hitting them." Okay, I had no idea where she was going with this. "You haven't seen that image of what humans would look like if they were evolved to survive car crashes? The man has like no neck and lots of fat to cushion the impact." "No." "Okay," she shook her head. "The point is, some people in this field believe that at some point, creatures would evolve abilities that mimic technology, like birds that look like drones, or bats that can sense electromagnetic fields. Who's to say this thing that you and Rochelle have described hasn't evolved the ability to send out radio signals, hack our entire mobile system?" "That's ridiculous," Luke interjected. "So what, this creature's like texting in English?" No, nothing like that. States, local governments, they often have pre-programmed emergency messages, like a protocol for hurricanes, earthquakes, nuclear threats, etc. This thing, it just hacked a signal to send a particular protocol. Same thing with Rachel, she said, looking sympathetically at her. We're all sending little electromagnetic signals in our brains all the time. Neural impulses, sharks, 400 million year old living fossils can detect them. These things, they can hack them. So when I saw my dad, I glanced at Luke. That thing was hacking my brain signals. Jamie nodded. It's a little more complicated than that. I believe this thing sends out a chemical in the air too, at close range, that messes with some neurotransmitters. But essentially, yes. Okay, but why's the basement safe then? Because it's too big to get down there? Luke asked. I'm glad you asked, Jamie replied with a big victorious smile on her face, like she was just about to tell us the secret to the universe. They chose that emergency protocol with the basement because their abilities don't work if you're underground, just how your phone reception goes out when you're underground. A heavy silence filled the room. Luke and I looked at each other. For one, this sounded pretty out there, conspiracy theory level stuff, more unbelievable than Roswell. On the other hand, nothing I'd experienced in the past 24 hours made sense. How do you know all this? I asked. This isn't the first time this has happened, she replied, her face grim. Almost 10 years ago, the same thing happened out by Woodland, on the border of Wharton State Forest. I studied it then too, but there weren't as many of them. Okay, but the text didn't get sent to everyone, Luke said. Only us and Rochelle so far that we know of. Right, so these things, I call them stickmen by the way, they only target people with overactive imaginations, people who send out really clear, strong brain signals. It's easier for them to find you, and it's easier for them to hack your brain. They're not actually producing the image you see of your deceased loved ones or whatever. They're just knocking it loose from your memory, from something you've imagined. If you've imagined your kid dying 1,000 times because you have anxiety or OCD, that makes it all the easier for them to use it against you and lure you in. And of course, there's more for them to eat. More for them to eat? Yeah, they eat brains. I mentioned that, didn't I? More awkward, heavy, suffocating silence. Kate said she heard the doctor saying she's going to die, he said in a soft voice. Is that true? Jamie glanced at me but stayed silent. Richella jumped in, her voice full of heartache. Jamie told me once it bites you, it's linked to you, it will follow you and end you. It'll show you your worst nightmares first, Jamie interjected, absolutely unable to read the room. Show you everything you fear. But when it starts showing you yourself in these waking nightmares, that usually means you only have a day left. I swallowed a wave of nausea. Then I started getting out of the hospital bed. I needed to get out of here. Away from Jamie's stare, Luke's concern. Just a moment of silence. Maybe I get a Coke from the vending machine. Not even a Diet one. I hadn't had a full sugar one in ages. I tried to keep out the memory of my dad before me in my mom's basement. I had imagined him saying those exact words. When I was at my lowest point years ago, when a flicker of suicide showed itself in an ocean of postpartum depression, and that guy, the stickman or whatever, had used it against me. Another wave of nausea. I pushed towards the door. Wait, Richelle said, standing up, reaching for my arm. I'll be right back, I snapped. I made my way down the empty hospital hallway. Beeping machines, echoey footsteps in the distance. Tears pricked my eyes. I kept going, making a left, then a right, following the signs for the vending machines. My feet shuffled along the ground, taking me there slowly, ever so slowly. Kate, stop. I turned to see Luke coming after me. He stopped 6 feet away, trying to give me space. I just need a minute, I replied, my voice shaky. No, it's not that. Your mom just texted me and we have to go, Grace. His voice broke. My heart broke with it. What happened? She fell, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's not conscious. They're rushing her to the hospital. To the hospital? You mean here? They're taking her here? I asked frantically. They're taking her to the hospital, he repeated. Something twinged inside me. That doesn't make sense. That's not an answer. I looked down, number on the floor, something black, slick and wet on the green linoleum floor. A tendril like a long umbilical cord attached to Luke's foot and leading down the hallway. I felt dizzy. The world started to tilt. Kate. I turned around to see Luke behind me, frozen, eyes wide. I looked back. Other Luke was no longer standing there. It was me. I was staring at my own face. I wish I could say it looked different, one eye popping out, skin all blistered and pink, but it wasn't. It looked exactly like me, like looking in a mirror. I looked down. Other me was holding a pillow. She held my gaze for a second, then looked down at the floor. I followed her gaze. Grace was lying at my feet, eyes closed, hands resting neatly under her head, fast asleep. No, no, no. I knew this intrusive thought. I knew how it ended. It's not real. It's not real. I turned and ran back down the hallway, reaching for Luke's hand, rustling behind me. I couldn't look back. I couldn't. Luke pulled me into the room and I followed, breathless. We have to get underground. It's here. Richella and Jamie looked at me. Then they looked at the floor. For a second, I thought I was going to see my worst nightmare, but instead, I looked down to see blood dripping off my arm, seeping through my shirt, traveling in wet, soaky rivulets, dripping to the floor. Drip, drip, drip. Jamie shot up and walked over to me. Gently, she pushed back the cloth of my shirt, exposing the wound on my shoulder. Necrotic tissue, she whispered. She shook her head sadly. It's begun. I can't die. I can't. My shoulder pulsed with pain. I continued running down the hall towards the big red exit sign. The hospital hadn't released me. Stop. Luke begged, catching up with me, but I forced myself to run faster, despite the pain. I wasn't going to just sit in the hospital room and wait to die. Obviously, from what the doctors said, that's what happened to the last one. I was going to get underground. Maybe I would have to stay there forever, or until they found a way to kill these things. I would not leave Grace without a mother. I wanted more than anything to go to her, hug her, tell her I loved her, but maybe that thing could follow me even into a basement. I didn't think so, but I couldn't risk it. The best thing I could do was get underground, buy time. Grace was as safe as she could be with my mom underground. I ran towards the exit. The red sign glowed brightly in the darkness of the hallway. One of the lights flickered overhead. My bare feet slapped against the floor. The floor felt sharp. I kept running, but it didn't seem like I was getting any closer to the exit sign. What the? I glanced back. Luke wasn't following me anymore, nor Rochelle or Jamie. The hallway extended behind me, stretching back into the darkness infinitely. I kept running. The exit door was open now, still so far away. A stiff breeze blew in, ruffling through my hair. It smelled of pine and wood and decay. Keep running. The ground was so rough under my feet. The air was so cold. The lights above me flickered wildly. The door didn't get any closer, no matter how fast I sprinted. A few leaves swirled by outside in the darkness. Keep running. The lights above me flickered out, and then I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was in the middle of the woods. Pine trees stretched up into the darkness. The sand littered with sharp sticks and rocks bit into the bare soles of my feet. Silence rang in my ears except for a light fluttering sound somewhere in the darkness. No, it tricked me. I wheeled around. I didn't see any lights, any break in the trees. How deep in the barrens am I? How long have I been running? The darkness closed in, suffocating me. I felt my pockets, no phone, no way to call for help, no way to know where I am. I sucked in a breath, ready to scream into the darkness, but that would draw the stickmen to me, wouldn't it? Or did it not matter? Did they already know where I was? I looked up at the stars, at the slices of sky poking through the pines. I tried to identify them. Is that Cassiopeia? But I didn't know anything about how to tell directions from the stars. Besides, the pines blocked out most of the sky anyway. No, wait, that's not the way to do this. I ran in here. My legs didn't feel that sore, even though it must have distorted time. I'd only felt like I was running for a minute. If I'd run 10 miles into the barrens, I'd know. I just needed to figure out what direction I'd come from. I wheeled around trying to look for footprints, flattened vegetation, any sign of where I'd come from. But it was pitch dark out and I didn't have any source of light. There was moonlight, enough to see so that I didn't smack into a tree, but not enough to look for footprints in the sand. I stared at the trees, but the branches were up too high and too thin to support my weight. I couldn't climb them to get a better vantage point. I ransacked my pockets again, nothing. So I started off in a random direction, sticks stabbed at my feet, pebbles rolled underneath my toes. I kept walking forward, trying to keep a straight line. The Pine Barrens is 1,000,000 acres, but an acre wasn't that many square miles. I remembered that from somewhere. I tried to focus on doing the math. If I was in the center and walked in a random direction, how long would it take me to get to the edge? 5 hours? 10? More than that? And of course I'd heard the stories. Even without the stickmen, the Pine Barrens were deadly enough. Carnivorous plants, rattlesnakes, and a way of turning people around. It was easy to get lost in the infinite pines. I thought of Grace, Luke telling her I was gone, her crying, melting down. She needed me. Maybe years ago at that low point in my life right after Grace was born, I wouldn't have been quite so panicked at the thought of dying. But I was panicking now. I picked up the pace. Sticks stabbed at my feet harder. I tried to keep a straight line, but it was so hard in the dark, and for all I knew, I was just walking deeper and deeper into the barrens. Then I saw it. A clearing. My heart soared. That must be where I came from. It was one of the burned areas. The fire had hollowed out a large clearing. It was lit in silver tones by the nearly full moon, no longer obscured. Some pines still stood, completely bare of needles, skeletal and black. Ash blackened the pale sand beneath, the color of bone. A few pine saplings poked through the destruction, only inches tall. It was deathly silent. I'm never gonna get out of here. I looked up at the blackened pines, stretching up to the sky like fingers. Snap. I whirled around. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees, painted in all tones of gray from the moonlight, barely visible among the trees. I took off into a run, but in my panic I tripped. It felt like it was in slow motion. The sandy, ashy ground rose up to meet me. Pain shot up my arms. My shoulders screamed in pain. Sticks scraped my cheek. Snap, snap, snap. I scrambled up to see myself standing there, arms hanging limply at my sides, hair grazing my shoulders. "Let me go," I screamed. My voice echoed and died into the forest. She stepped closer. I could hear too a wet smacking sound. There was another slimy black appendage attached to her feet, controlling her like she was a puppet. She canted her head at me and her lips split into an unnatural grin. I turned and tried to run again. An intense wave of dizziness hit me. The ground tilted, heaviness pressed down on my head. My stomach lurched and I was vomiting, stumbling, tripping in my own puddle of vomit. "Stop," I croaked. I was lying on my back, warm, wet vomit soaking through the back of my shirt. Twisted black appendages were filling up the corners of my vision, melting in with the twisted black pines stretching up to the sky. The stars above me looked like shooting stars, moving across the sky with how dizzy I was. The sky was replaced with my own face. Her hair hung onto my face, sticking to the sweat and the vomit. Her lips curled into a smile, and then her mouth began to open, wider, 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 rows of sharp teeth like a lamprey's descending into the darkness of her throat. I tried to push it off, but my hands met slime. I was pinned by the creature, one of the stickmen. It was only her disembodied head hovering over me, attached to a tangled black mess of creature. "They eat brains," Jamie's voice echoed in my head as the teeth loomed closer. So close I couldn't see any of the barrens anymore. Grace. What's she going to do without me? She'll never recover. Her entire life will be ruined. I can't. I'm so sorry. And then I realized the stickmen were attracted to brain signals. What if I'd done something I'd never done before? What if I just stopped thinking? I closed my eyes, ignored the warm, rotting breath on my face, ignored the slime seeping through my shirt, ignored thoughts of Grace. I used every last bit of my willpower to stop thinking. Nothing. A void. Non-existence. A clicking sound came from above me. The creature began to shift its weight. I continued thinking about nothing. Absolutely nothing. The creature pulled itself off me. When I opened an eye, it no longer wore my head. It was twisting and turning, making clicking sounds, lifting some of its appendages in the air, as if confused, as if it thought I'd escaped and it was trying to sense me out again. I lay there in the dark, burnt forest, thinking of nothing for seconds, minutes, hours. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, pushing away thoughts of Grace, of my future, of hers, pushing it all out and being empty. When the sun began to rise, I pulled myself up. The burnt forest was bathed in the pink hues of dawn. My skin was covered in vomit and black slime. My shoulders still throbbed with pain, and there was no sign of the stickmen. It took me another few hours, but in the daylight I was able to find my way back. After walking around in circles for a while, I caught a glimpse of a road through the trees. I'd apparently fled the hospital and run a half-mile into the pine barrens across the street. Luke and hospital staff were looking for me all night. I was reunited with Grace, and it was the happiest day of my life. I think the stickman is still linked to me. We've been spending our nights in the basement where we've been totally safe. Richelli, Jamie, and I have been working together to figure out how to kill it for good. Some guy online from the incident 10 years ago claims drowning them works. But for now, I am content to be home and be safe, even if it isn't forever and a million bad things are waiting to happen.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.